So now we know why the One Piece world is called the Blue Planet, but what makes flooding in the One Piece world so interesting? The reason is because of the mysterious true history that's submerged beneath it. In other words, changes in sea levels could hide or reveal key locations and relics of the ancient past, such as clues to the location of Laugh-Tale. This is already foreshadowed by the underwater relics of the old world, such as Noah and Impelled Down. These are the types of artifacts that make up the complex true history, as well as provide us with clues to various other One Piece mysteries, such as the underwater kingdom in Jinbei's cover story. It's fair to assume some of these sunken locations could be enormous, seeing as the recent panel we cut away to during Vegapunk's speech depicted a massive structure that dwarves even the Sea Kings. This gives credence to the idea the ancient kingdom is somewhere below the sea, but it still likely has some conditions that need to be met in order for it to be accessible. This may be partly why Roger was at Laugh-Tale at the wrong time, as water levels were yet to rise, as predicted by Vegapunk. It's worth noting Roger's crew have traits that suggest they knew about an upcoming flood, such as Rayleigh being a shipcoater. This also goes for some of their other relationships, such as Tom building a sea train. In One Piece, the theme of flooding isn't new to the story. Clues have been hidden since as far back as Longring, mainly in its geography, but also in the Davy Backfight trials, where we see turbulent currents and a strange tall flick of land. Other geographic examples include the contrast between old and new Wano's altitudes, the high plateaus of Drum Island, the submerged Eve Tree, and the raised city of Zo. Furthermore, these themes have been included in characters and their dreams, like I mentioned with the puffing Tom, and Tom wanting to make Water 7 float, echoing Thriller Bark. There are other spicy features to the whole flooding motif, however, one of which is crazy subtle, but Oda likely knew exactly what he was doing. If I asked you, does the world government have global control? Many fans would say yes, but the truth is they control Paradise, parts of the New World, have barely any presence on Sky Islands and virtually no presence under the sea, highlighted by the fact Shirahoshi, the embodiment of Poseidon, was for the most part left alone or not identified by the world government despite being an ancient weapon. Now, what if I asked you which One Piece characters have names relating to planets? You'd think the Gorosei initially, right? But there's also Neptune. And Neptune lives under the sea, which is somewhere the government has little control and has been posited to rise, threatening available land. In other words, it's possible the Gorosei are actually increasing the risk of compromising their own authority if they cause a flood, because as it rises, so does the power of the sea with it, such as the undersea inhabitants and resistance, etc, etc. Ahoy there, fellow One Piece nerds, it's Den Den Kushi, and as always we're about to bust open the secrets and mysteries Oda's been keeping from us, while at the same time explaining the importance of the upcoming flood motif that's been talked about for over a decade in the community. I see a few comments saying that we're under-subbed, so make sure you fix that now and subscribe, and in return I'll click your like button. Anywho, without further ado, let's get into this undersea spice. Did you know every 1,000 years underwater volcanoes in the One Piece world erupt, causing new land to be formed? This new land displaces water, which leads to floods that wipe out the history and technology of that time. But 1,000 years ago, something much, much bigger happened, again removing the true history of the world, but this time on an unprecedented scale. Emu is another force that suppresses technology and history from advancing past a certain level, but why? The answer goes back to this global catastrophe 1,000 years ago that was bigger than any before it. More specifically because the disaster was caused by human technology, or in other words, it was man-made. This technology blasted a hole in Eni's lobby, grazed the core of the planet, and came out of the other side, creating Reverse Mountain as an exit wound, you could say. Disturbing the core in this way caused the volcanoes, and particularly the underwater ones around the equator, to erupt on an unprecedented scale, which created the Red Line, breaking up land and flooding the majority of land that remained. But how do we know this? Well, firstly, we see throughout the story that many locations have both high and low areas that are shown below and above the ocean. Oda made a point of this with Longring Longland, an island greatly affected by tides. Similar to Water 7, an annual event affects the local sea levels, leaving some otherwise hidden parts of the island above water. This allows the inhabitants to travel over land to different parts of the island, kinda like a migration. This is also a regular and routine thing for the locals of Longring Longland, meaning they are a nomadic people. This idea is intentional from Oda and is particularly spicy because of the island's ties to Joy Boy, as covered by myself, Dak, StrawHatLucas in previous videos, and could also suggest that Joy Boy and his people were nomadic. The fact the island looks like a crown when the sea is at a certain level is likely significant, as is the fact it's the 7th island the Straw Hats visit. Now, since Vegapunk's revelation to the world that there would be a great flood, we can take the themes associated with Long Dong Shlongland and search for clues on a larger scale. Wano is raised high above sea level. Because of this, the country is effectively annexed from the rest of the world unless a secret path is used. Wano from a top-down view seems inconspicuous, but looking from side on, we see a strange shaped island seemingly showing different levels at different depths. In Wano, we learnt that there are underwater ruins from the Void Century years ago, which can still be found deep within the base of Mount Fuji. Pluton is said to be down there also, alongside 3 poneglyphs. However, in order to access these places, the water level currently on Wano needs to be lowered. This is stated to require physically breaking down the surrounding walls, subsequently letting water pour out into the sea. This is likely a direct parallel to the red line, as we see yet another ring of land restricting sea levels. We know 800 years ago the water level was significantly lower, as stated by Kazuki elder Sukiyaki. So here again we're seeing an example of an island with varying degrees of elevated land and sea levels. Not only this, but submerged below the water is the true history, in the form of an ancient weapon and a few poneglyphs. Robin had it revealed by Sukiyaki to her some truths about the world, which again shows us the connection between the true history and being submerged. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we have seen a sunken kingdom that's been abandoned by people and since inhabited by giant sea creatures, all of which are usually found on land. This is the submerged structure Oda showed in Jinbei's cover story. The mysterious structure shares the same markings that can be found on Kuma's clothing, but there's a subtle difference between the pawpaw marking and this one. Could this be an ancient sunken kingdom of the Buccaneers? The kingdom was thrown onto land, which is likely a reverse of what truly happened to it originally. Also, for restoring the kingdom, Jinbei is given a poneglyph by the now friendly sea creatures, demonstrating to the reader the connection between the hidden true history and the undersea. So in summary, again, we see secret history hidden underwater, there's a poneglyph underwater, and both of which are thrown onto land, which is a reverse of probably what we're going to see in the Void Century history. That said, it's important to understand in One Piece some clues to flooding may instead appear above sea level. Alabasta, the home of the most important royal family in the story, the Nefertaris, has many connections to the sea levels, highlighted for example by the sea cats, but I'll touch on the sea cats in a second. The giga significant location during the arc is the underground crypt. Hear that? Underground crypt, where yet we find another secret poneglyph in a situation where Robin goes deep underground, very similar to Wano, and discovers some true history. What's interesting about this poneglyph though is this time the poneglyph contains the location of Pluton as opposed to true history, but Oda doesn't miss a trick, and he had Robin read out some of the true history to Crocodile regarding the hero of Altea, Mamudin. This name is now more significant than ever because of Emu calling herself Mu. I do want to point out that Wizard of Oz is an expert in the connections between the kingdom of Mu and One Piece, which is an Atlantis-style myth, which definitely seems relevant at this point. So, to summarize, under the current sea level there lies a secret tomb where we learn some secret history in Alabasta. But that's not all. Alabasta is littered with references to flooding. Most cover pages Vivi features in also features animals, plants or objects that have a relationship between water and land, such as otters, lilies and watermelon. Cats are usually found on land, but in Alabasta we see sea cats that have potentially adapted due to changing sea levels. This is probably what Oda's going for with the sea cats in Alabasta. It's also a sea cat that took Jinbei to the underwater kingdom I mentioned before. As you can see here, the map shows all the relevant locations at the time of the arc. Notice something strange. The capital is raised from the ground as if there was once water around there, which weirdly enough also matches the capital in Wano amongst other locations. Crocodile's dance powder featured heavily in the arc, which is used to displace water, leaving only dry desert. And we also saw Smoker use a ray machine at the end of the arc. One more nuance to the Alabaster arc, which no one wants to talk about, is Zoro did fall to a lower level when he came across the poneglyph. That never happened. But let's move swiftly on to somewhere else before someone finds out I said that. Now let's look at a more obscure example with the snow-covered Drum Island. Immediately when arriving at Drum Island's North American-based scenery, we see what Oda calls the Rockies, and Luffy climbs them at one point. At the top of the tallest drum of land, there is a castle, a peculiar place for a castle to be built, considering how difficult it would be to build and live so high up while being segregated from society. Of course, this is echoing the idea of Marie-Joie, but perhaps this ties to higher sea levels also. The top of the Rockies would act as small islands, almost like a microcosm of the current seas, or Wano's layout. Drum Island also has ties to the concept of the Will of D, as well as Kureha's secret to youth, so again, more references to the true history. The Will of D goes back to the Void Century alongside Joy Boy and likely the Gomu, the devil fruit eaten by our protagonist. The fruit is symbolically represented by its onomatopoeia 56. And on our introduction to the island Water 7, it featured a large 5 and 6 written on the walls referencing this, demonstrating already some subtle ties to Water 7's relationship with the true history. We see another connection shortly after with the blueprints of Pluton. During the Water 7 arc, we find out the sea level is steadily rising and that Water 7 is in fact built on top of previous versions of the island that sank. For some reason, my spider sense tells me that Impel Down may be described as something similar, that it was originally one floor and it's been built on top as the sea levels increased. But anyway, Iceberg discusses making Water 7 a floating island to avoid the Aqua Laguna, which floods the city annually, causing all sorts of issues for Water 7's inhabitants. This is reminiscent of Thriller Bark and may tie together officially later. Water 7 is known for its shipwrights, and so Iceberg and others probably do have the skills to float an island and even navigate one, so maybe we will see that towards the end of the story, Water 7 being made to float. In one scene, we see Elbaf for the first time. Well, at least the bottom of it. We see a tree, and the shot suggests the tree is absolutely massive, comparable even to the biggest places and creatures in One Piece. What makes this significant is that we know giants are from Elbaf, and that giants don't engage much with the rest of the world or their politics. Elbaf is like Wano, separated from the rest of the world. This could very well be because of the altitude at which Elbaf resides. Changes in sea level or any other form of flooding seem irrelevant to an island of this scale, which could be the reason why the world government fails to control the strength of the giants. Later on in the story, we visit a location that appears to have found a very different way of dealing with high tides. Zou is a city sitting on the back of an elephant, several kilometers above sea level. The city itself portrays a similar circular design we've seen before with Alabaster, Wano, Water 7 as mentioned, as well as some others such as Goa Kingdom, Amigasa Village, and Shundora. Due to Zunisha's height, virtually no change in sea or weather conditions affect the city. As for connections to the true history, not only does Zou house a very significant poneglyph, but the city also features the iconic whale tree. Both whales and trees are connected to Joy Boy, as we saw with his debut panel featuring both whales and the sea forest. The history of the mink and Zunisha, as well as Zou itself, is at least 1,000 years old, and definitely appears to be placed on Zunisha's back for a particular reason. So again, we're seeing a culture that's protecting themselves from flooding, yet has a load of true history. It's understandable that people would choose to build up high if they were aware of the damage the sea is capable of. We get a taste of this with Whitebeard's Rumble Fruit, a character that was noted to be able to destroy the world. The reader saw Whitebeard cause 2 tidal waves that would have completely submerged Marineford if not for Aokiji turning them into ice, something that may have also happened centuries ago. In fact, we also see tidal waves with Big Mom in Whole Cake, the Aqua Laguna, and also in the scenery in Wano. During Kaido and Big Mom's demise in Wano, we saw seawater mix with magma, which led to a huge explosion, and interestingly, we also see magma and ice abilities affect each other in Marineford, causing the ice to melt and liquid water to form. Again, this is all likely foreshadowing for the true history that will be revealed, particularly seeing as water is so distinctly dangerous to devil fruit users. The red line, a rock formation described as impassable due to its height, is further evidence flooding ties to the true history, as we can assume whoever decided to move up the red line did so due to the threat of increased sea levels. It's at Marijwa the readers hear that Gorosei mention a cleansing. A cleansing is synonymous with a flood, both mythologically and symbolically, particularly pertaining to the Bible. Now, under the ocean, we see this again with Noah, based explicitly off Noah's Ark, a biblical myth about a great cleansing via global floods. This suggests that some parties do know of upcoming floods and have made plans accordingly. I did want to add that on the way down to Fishman Island, Oda showed a ship go down because it flooded, and I thought this is a really nice little nuance from Oda, demonstrating the irony that not even people under the sea are immune to the effects of flooding and are still vulnerable to its damage. But now let's talk about what it is that might lead to the increased sea levels that Vegapunk theorized with his final speech. There's 4 main potential ways sea levels can be significantly manipulated in the One Piece world, which are a water fruit, more specifically a fruit that has the ability to move oceans. We have seen devil fruits interact with water, such as with Oven and Big Mom, but most often a body of water is absolute kryptonite to a devil fruit user, so interesting. Secondly is the ability to control the weather. A device or devil fruit that allows the user to change weather conditions would be very significant. This would explain how Old Wano was flooded by rainfall so easily despite them being the best masons in the world, and is also seen in Wano's counterpart Alabasta through the Rain Machine and Dance Powder. Of course, Nami would tie in here as well, which might give us some credence to why she's always wearing crowns, etc. in the cover pages. Thirdly, we have channeling, for example, breaking the red line, which would allow waters from different oceans to mix, which I'll touch on in a second. And finally, we have tides. A dramatic change in tides could cause flooding and displacement of sea levels. In the real world, tides are caused by Earth's moon, so this may include some involvement from the Fairyverse Enel went to. Now, even in our own world, we are all well aware of the dangers of rising sea levels as climate change takes its course. Holland, for example, is under the realistic threat of being submerged over the coming decades as it sits just 1 meter above sea level. This is the level the sea in the One Piece world was said to rise by after using the Mother Flame on Lelesia. The One Piece story, although surreal, is grounded in a sense of logic and reality, and thanks to Shanks and Buggy arguing, we know there is a North Pole and a South Pole in the One Piece world, so Oda could dive into the real-life concept of global warming. This would go together well with theories about there being a pole shift that happened many years ago in the One Piece universe. Evidence of global warming can be found with the Mother Flame, which was held in a liquid, assumably to keep it cool. I've got a video on why Emu used the Mother Flame so close to Marijwa, in which I go into detail about the reason why Emu chose Lelesia. In summary, it states that the Mother Flame as an energy source would heat up the surrounding area and cause warming issues, such as thawing the straw hats in the Marijwa cellar, and this fits absolutely perfect into the idea of global warming affecting sea levels in the One Piece world. However, there are other possibilities to the cause of the specific flooding Vegapunk talked about, and the most interesting ones here are probably the man-made ones. Sea levels could be instead changed through tides or channeling ocean water from one place to another, which may have been done destructively. This is possible on a grand scale thanks to the enormous red line, which essentially acts as a sea wall. Breaking even part of the red line would take an extraordinary feat, such as the ancient weapons, and if this is how flooding occurred in the past, it strongly implies the sea changes were not accidental. Also, if we take into account the height of Zunisha, the red line, the Florian Triangle, Mount Fuji, and the rest of Wano, it seems as though the potential heights that these sea levels can reach are extreme. I did want to touch on the idea of the devil fruit as well, that would give the user the ability to control water. Firstly, devil fruits are weak against water, making this less likely, but perhaps Emu and the Gorosei have their abilities without actually eating a fruit, meaning they're not vulnerable in the same way as your average fruit user. If we think about how much water would be needed to flood one island, let alone an entire ocean, it seems unlikely that Oda would bring this in so directly, bearing in mind plot devices such as Dance Powder he could use instead. It could be a variation of a water fruit, however, such as a rain god fruit, connecting to the mentions in Skypiea. This possibly explains Vivi seemingly summoning rain when she screams, so maybe the ability to control water isn't from a devil fruit, but instead a lineage factor or some kind of haki. Whether manipulation ties to Nami's abilities Wolveria, where she was trained, Big Mum and her homies, and lastly the major battles where we see the sky split. I mentioned channeling is another way to affect sea levels. This would be done similar to a lock in a canal. For example, if Poseidon was used to break a hole in the red line, this would allow the neighbouring seas to mix, ultimately causing chaos in the adjoining oceans and their tides. Yes, it's possible this could have happened in the past during the Void Century and was covered up. Lastly, we have the possible of changing tides, which could definitely be caused by many things such as the Lalesia incident or other similar strikes. We also have underwater volcanoes and again even great battles like a Marineford that seem to affect the sea. In the real world, however, the moon plays a dominant role in our tidal changes, and we do have a moon in One Piece, so we may yet see Enel and the Fairy Verth make a comeback. Seeing as we have an idea of who has built high above sea level already, this gives us clues as to what cultures may already be aware of flooding. Two of the tallest places in the world are Marijois and Elbaf. Emu currently resides at one, and we've just had it revealed Joy Boy's connected to the other. Emu is alive, Joy Boy is dead. Emu's name backwards is C, so it's likely that Emu and Joy Boy do play central roles in all of this. I theorized recently Emu is the manifestation of Earth with a hate for humanity, which fits in well with the idea that Emu would flood the world to make space for rebirth. Also, at one point we hear the Gorosei discuss a cleansing, meaning the Gorosei likely know about the power to change sea levels too. So in conclusion, I believe sea levels have been manipulated by the world government, using Uranus to cause disastrous floods. This would be done to physically and metaphorically wash away problems the Gorosei may have with certain islands or its people, as well as prevent the rise of any contentious cultures. The ancient weapons could be used to calm the waters after Pluton breaks a gap in the red line or some other combination of ancient firepower. This will be turning ancient weapons into something positive, like many of us believe was the case originally with them. Now, with all that in mind, there you have it. A brief look into an otherwise super deep theme in One Piece that's going to play a huge role. If you've made it this far, you've just won some Sabaody bubble bath. Let me know in the comments what color you want, and I'll see you again soon with a video about Joy Boy's allies betraying him. So sub right this second, give us a like, and be kind to others, and peace.